Hey guys, David Lyons with MinisterSearch here. I'm starting a series on the 7 things to determine before you start a search for a pastoral staff member. These are just things that we've learned over the years that are must-happens before you ever start looking at resumes. The first thing that you need to identify and determine is who you are. What do I mean by who you are? These would be things like your mission, vision, values, statements, core beliefs. Now, one of the challenges that we see, and we'll unpack this more when we get into the series, is many churches have a very similar vision statement or mission statement. They all sound somewhat alike. The problem is that really what the church is about? Oftentimes it's not. Sometimes staff don't even know what the mission or vision statement are. And so it's important to identify those and also stick to it. Number 2 is you need to determine what you believe. Now this is different than who you are. What you believe is part of who you are, but it's important to even unpack this or dive into this even deeper. What you believe is doctrine and theology. Yes, I know that there's a statement of faith in place, but these documents from church to church to church look very similar. But we all know that each church has different beliefs on certain doctrinal elements. So it's critical to not just look at your statement of faith, but talk through each position so you, your team know. Then when you're looking at candidates, you'll know if they're a fit. Number 3 is you need to determine what they will do. What do I mean by that? That's going to be a well-written job description, a quantifiable, understandable, makes sense job description. The daily, weekly, monthly, annual duties and responsibilities for this role, how success is measured, to whom they'll report. It's critical that this is all lined out before you ever start looking at candidates. So that's what will they do. Number 4 is you need to determine what they will look like. What do I mean by that is that's what we call a candidate profile. In other words, how many years of experience does this person has to have? What's the minimum education requirements? Are there certain qualifications, licensing, ordination that you want? And the list goes on and on and on. And it's imperative that you really define these things before you start looking at candidates, because this is where your accountability is going to take place. Is you're going to pray that God would tell you what the candidate needs to look like ahead of time, and then when you start looking at candidates, you'll be able to look through that lens, and it helps keep you on focus. So that's profiling. What does a candidate look like? Number 5 is how will you know? You've got to determine how you're going to know who the right candidate is. Of course, this is a spirit-led process. It's essential. But in doing this for 14 years, working with thousands of pastors and churches all across the United States and in Canada, one thing that we've learned is emotion can be confused, urgency can be confused, fear or pain can be confused as spirit leading. And so what we found is the more information that can be established ahead of time, the easier it will be for you to understand if this is really God's person for the job. So understanding what that candidate will look like, how you will know if they fit. So then we tie into number 6. How do you find them? Things have changed over the last 10-15 years in how to go about finding a pastoral staff member, and I'm glad they have. Just because of some of the lack of success in churches trying to hire pastors. So you've got options. Obviously a search firm is an option. You can look from within. We see that a lot and are a big fan of that if the person fits, and we'll talk about that later in the series. There are job boards, websites, seminaries, networking. Determining how you're going to go about finding your candidate, which of those or which combination of those will be really critical. And then there's number 7. You need to determine ahead of time what the interview process will be. And so what we like to do is put a framework in place. Here's what the first interview is going to look like, and here's what we're going to cover. In fact, you need to have what questions you're going to answer, and that's something that we'll dive into when we get to that in the series. You need to understand what the second interview is going to look like. Is it in person? Is it telephone? Is it Skype? Is it FaceTime? And then the third interview, you need to be determining who's going to be involved in each interview, all the way down to when you're going to talk about money, reference checking, and even offering the candidate the position. Establish that framework. Will you deviate? Absolutely. But you can't be flexible if you don't have structure in place. So understanding that and having it in place is important. Look, this is just scratching the surface. I know it may seem like a lot, but what we found is the reason that our candidates stick so long is because we do this type of stuff and a whole bunch. And so use this to the best of your ability when you're going out. Be diligent and disciplined and hold true to it, and it'll really have a positive impact as you add to your staff. Thanks.